Quick heads up, this is a sequel to these two videos, so if you want to stay in the loop on what I said, then you should watch these. I've left a card in the top right with the whole playlist, so go check it out. Howdy everyone, and welcome back to the Hawaii Part 2 analysis. Last time we left off, we explored all of Black Rainbows. To recap everything so far, Simon and his unspecified romantic partner Betty have gone off to Hawaii for a wedding. The two then went on a date at a luau, rekindling their loveless relationship. And in White Ball, we have finally reached the titular wedding. The song name White Ball has two meanings, but I'll go over the first one right now. The White Ball is plain and simply a wedding. I've got a few reasons as to why. Firstly, weddings are decorated almost entirely in white. Secondly, weddings and their after parties are often held in ballrooms. Thirdly, a ball is defined as a formal dance occasion. Having a white-collared ball event sounds a lot like a wedding to me. Quick question though, whose wedding is it? I was pushing this off for a couple videos because I didn't want to invalidate people's fan theories they had about the whole thing. At least not without giving proper evidence, of course. But yeah, to the few people who think that this isn't Simon and Betty's wedding, it 100% is. These two are getting married in Hawaii, and there's no way around that. One final thing before I jump into the analysis itself, this song is actually a duet, so I'll be sure to point out whose perspective we're following. Trust me, it's important who is singing what here. Now that I've done all the housekeeping, let's actually analyze White Ball.
Drift aloft in some effortless place, bound by delicate tread, saving no face.
Simon sings this portion solo, and like all the lyrics in this album, they're very poetic and metaphorical in nature. The physical interpretation could be that Simon is stuck between being blissful and dreadful. A common way of describing positive emotions is weightlessness, which would be where lines 1 and 2 come in. The final line is weird to ascribe a physical characteristic with, but to me, it kinda reads as Simon saying he's gonna do something whether or not he regrets it. Where things get really interesting and where the true meaning of the line comes from is in line 3. I'll get into it a lot later, but this is the first song where it's obvious that something's wrong with Simon. What here is being bound by delicate dread? This could just be a fancy way of Simon saying he's stressed out about his wedding, but the word bound would be a strange one in that case. It's often only used in the context of restricting people, as if Simon's being held back from doing something. But what is he fighting back from doing? I'm gonna get back to that in just a little bit.
Air dissolves where one game is designed, something's elegant find, so the program goes.
Betty starts here with air dissolves, which I think symbolically means her breath is being taken away by Simon. Quick rain check, how many songs until she dies again? Obviously it's not just a death thing, but it's also another figure of speech. Love is often described as taking your breath away. With that context in mind, line 2 gets pretty interesting. Betty's breath is being taken away in a place where a game is designed. There just so happens to be a very famous board game where you get married, the game of life. Marriage is a big step in people's lives. It's often the moment where they directly plan for their future. Combining this aspect and the fact that it's making Betty feel breathless, the first two lines definitely refer to the wedding altar. It's not explicitly a church, but you could make a case for it being one pretty easily. Line 3 is also really strange. Something is given a possessive S on the end. This means that the word's a pronoun. This line hints to the two finding each other. It's kind of vague on purpose because it doesn't matter who found who, they just love each other and are connected. The fourth is super simple, wedding services are called programs. So you might be thinking back to earlier when I said this is the song that shows Simon's twisted qualities more. But how can that be, you say? It's just their wedding so far. If you've been paying attention to the cosmological theming of the analysis so far, you've probably picked up on how the 8 lines here have a major space theming to them. They're both singing about space stuff, but there's a clear contrast in what they're saying. Simon seems to be adrift in space, while Betty is more grounded somewhere. Are they referencing anything in specific though? Well, we have Betty singing about a nondescript something finding something elegant as instructed by a program. You know, now that I look at the album art again, there's a big freaking moon in the sky. This is almost definitely calling to the Apollo missions. Along with the wedding being the white ball, the moon could also be the white ball. Going off what we know from the last two songs, we know two things about space. Celestial bodies are impossibly far away from Earth, and space is a representation of heaven. Simon, being the metaphorical astronaut, is treading where one shouldn't go. It's as if he's longing for something way out in space, with Betty serving as the metaphorical mission control, making sure he doesn't fly off into nothingness. I'm gonna loop back around to this element. I'm sorry, I wish I could cover it now, but there's so much of this stuff that I need to put it all later. This is one of the little side blurbs within the break of the song, but I think it continues the theme of something nefarious being hidden. What's the text backwards saying here? It's kinda fun doing it at this point. This line is almost certainly not directed at Betty. It's scrambled in the exact same way to the Mind Electric, which is heavily implied to be internal dialogue. Thus, this is likely internal dialogue as well. Realistically, this is probably something the creators threw in for fun, but it leaves lingering implications. Simon's wedding should be enjoyable for him, right? He supposedly loves Betty, and yet the only positivity we can prove is genuine is him pointing at something funny. It's as if Simon feels he's only obligated to be here. He's outwardly expressed that he's missed the connections between him and his partner in Isle, but there's something pushing back against him. Could there be a split in Simon's personality? This is going in the later section as well.
Fate decides how these columns align, birth by chess or benign, every moment.
Simon sings the first three lines here before going into a duet with Betty. We have fate being mentioned in line 1, which could be another callback to Apollo. This idea is furthered in line 2 with the mention of columns. Columns brings to the mind Greek imagery, which is where Apollo is from. By the way, let's cover what columns do really quickly. Their main function is to hold up the roof and front, or facade, of the building. Another hint to Simon being deceptive in this song. Line 3 may be our best clues to what Simon is looking for exactly. We know he's attempting to reach out to heaven somehow, but why? Simon wants to know the true nature of the universe, and he is 100% disassociating because of it. At the very least, there's a little voice in the back of his head telling him that the world isn't real and that it's just fate's game. He asks birthed by chess or benign because chess is structured and benign is nothing. He thinks that getting into heaven will show him the truth about this. Line 4 is more of a transition into the next section, but it's also relating back to the existential dread. The line every moment could be referring to Simon stressing about the ebbs and flows of the universe, while at the exact same time Betty is singing about their real lives. We know there's some kind of split between these two here, as demonstrated in the first two stanzas.
Marble gods, tango circles in space, round the already dead, hung by staircase.
For the rest of the piece, everything's a duet, so I'm going to assume that we're going to be split the whole way down. Betty is singing in the physical, while Simon is singing in the spiritual. I'll cover Betty first here, because the more grounded interpretation needs a little more explaining. Marble gods could likely be referring to a metaphorical representation of love. Marble is thought to represent purity and immortality, so to describe a god as made of marble would be to signify them as pure. Similarly, love is commonly thought to be pure and everlasting. This idea of love is further expressed in line 2. The tango is considered to be one of the most romantic and intimate dances out there, and the marble gods are set to tango in space, which could be a metaphor about the heavenly nature of love in this album. Line 3 helps to establish the idea that this love is everlasting. Even as people die, love still goes on. Line 4 is less clear-cut under Betty's interpretation, but I think I have an idea. So, you know when you go to visit your parents or grandparents and they tend to have a bunch of pictures hung up specifically around their staircase? That's what I think this line is referring to, at least for the physical side. In plenty of different popular media, the idea of a house staircase is representative of love and memories. With that covered, let's move into Simon's interpretation. If you buy into the explanation I've laid out earlier about Simon having a mental breakdown, then this reading is pretty crystal clear. The marble gods refer to Apollo and his friends, which in Simon's mind are the ones controlling everything. Line 2 is very similar to chess or benign from earlier. The tango is controlled and very intricate, similar to the game of chess. The phrase going in circles means to be doing the same thing over and over again. So if the marble gods are tangoing circles in space, that means they're controlling everything forever in heaven. Line 3 shares an interpretation with Betty, but for this context. This just leaves line 4, which I think is a bit of an important one. We have another instance of the album art being relevant with the staircase on the front. The metaphor is very straightforward. These are the stairs to heaven. Where does the hung part come from though? Well, I have two ideas. Removing by staircase from the middle of this phrase, you have the phrase hung up. This means to be emotionally upset or disturbed. So Simon would be hung up about the stairway to heaven. He wants to know the truth about the gods and he's stuck lingering on the way to meet them. My other idea is a little more dark. So we all know how Simon is punished for his actions in this album, right? Hung could be interpreted in a different way here, which results in Simon being punished for trying to reach heaven. I think both of these readings are valid, but I lean towards the first one a little more.
Wow.
The only thing of note in this line is that there are 3 people laughing, not 2. You have 2 normal and 1 in reverse. Think of those implications.
On and on. The awakening light will bathe slumber of ethereal sights.
At first, I couldn't really parse the meaning of this line, at least not without some help. You may or may not have seen me ask for some assistance on this line, and thanks to the commenter Gianimation, I've developed an interpretation. Line 1 definitely refers to eternity. Betty's interpretation is kind of clear-cut if you choose to take the split perspective like I do. It's some stuff about waking up next to your partner every single day. I don't think it's really that deep. Simon's interpretation is in stark contrast to this. The awakening light seems to be a reference to some sort of celestial truth. Calling something awakening can be a synonym for, well, learning the truth. The fact that it's light, something commonly referenced as a connection to the gods in both Isle and Black Rainbows, directly links it to heaven. Line 3 and 4 work together here to imply that Simon is seeing visions in his dreams. The light of truth is bathing him while he sleeps, and it's giving him visions into heaven. It seems as though Simon feels trapped, but by what? Putting this aside for later, by the way, just to let you know.
Today is renewed, is reborn. Each day I am new, I am yours.
This section perfectly tracks with Simon's obsession about heaven. Betty is singing to Simon to commit herself to him. It's a pretty standard thing during weddings, but if Simon's not committing himself to Betty, who is he committing himself to? Remember, whose spell is Simon under? Apollo's. He has become fully entranced in the idea of reaching heaven, so much that he feels as though he is reborn into a new person. Remember when I brought up the third voice in the back of Simon's head? Could they be taking over? I'm gonna analyze this later.
So please dismiss what they claim about this, being in vain to explain how expressed with a kiss, taking passionate steps towards the suspending abyss.
These 6 lines help to establish something that I think is often lost in the Hawaii Part 2 fandom. Betty is still in the real world here, so to me, this reads as Betty ignoring Simon's cavalcade of red flags because she loves him so much. Lines 3 and 4 directly express this. She cannot explain why, but she loves him regardless. It's not that her love is hard to express, but that she cannot think of a reason why she loves him. The first 2 lines imply that others may be claiming something is wrong or twisted about the relationship, to the point of Betty dismissing their concerns about the wedding. I'm not gonna lie, I can see where they're coming from. Simon is just off in his own dimension here. Lines 1 and 2 have him denying what he's doing is weird. And lines 3 and 4 read to me as Simon thinking love cannot give him his answer. He still understands nothing about the universe, even when he did everything society expects a man should do. There's some kind of palpable resent. In lines 5 and 6, Betty's waffling on about how they're stepping together through thick and thin, while Simon's taking passionate steps just over the abyss. You know, almost like being drift aloft in some effortless place. By this point in the song, the little voice is completely taken over. Simon has fully given into his delusions. This will be covered in more depth pretty soon, just give it a little bit.
Such impossible bliss.
This line is repeated 6 times, and I think both sides of this are in a delusional state right now. Betty's in full honeymoon phase here, thinking nothing will go wrong. On the other hand, Simon is so happy because he's so close to the truth. What he wants is within reach, but there's something in the way of it. A floor, suspending him over the abyss, if you will. So that was White Ball. Thank you for— yeah, you're not falling for this fake outro. I've gone over all the lyrics, but every time there's been a weird Simon moment, I've shoved it to the side for the very end. You know what happens in the song Murders. Everyone who has listened to this album once knows that she dies. Let's jump into the foreshadowing displayed in White Ball. Our first point of discussion relates to the delicate dread bounding Simon. If you didn't put the pieces together before I laid it out, Betty is the thing bounding him. This is clearly demonstrated in Bound by Delicate Dread and Floor Suspending Abyss. If Betty weren't there, he'd be adrift in his own mind. She is acting like an anchor to reality for him, his mission control. She desperately wants to have a normal life, to be happily married, and to grow old together. But Simon has his own plans. What's causing these issues? We saw that he genuinely cares in Isle Unto Thyself and Black Rainbows at least a little bit. Well, I think it directly has to do with the voice in the back of his head. I've brought it up a couple times in the song and the miniseries as a whole, but there's some kind of third entity at play. We see Simon's real thoughts and personality in Isle Unto Thyself. We see Betty's feelings and desires in Black Rainbows. To complete the trilogy of main characters, we see the voice at the back of Simon's mind unravel who he is in White Ball. I will be dubbing this character Apollo, and not for any magical or celestial reasons. There's no otherworldly forces in Hawaii Part 2. Heaven isn't literal, the gods don't exist, and Simon isn't under any kind of real spell. It's all a metaphor or stuff he's made up in his brain. Simon is Apollo's puppet. It doesn't want to be here. It has its own goals in mind. That's why it vehemently hates the wedding so much. But both Simon and Apollo are at the point of no return. They have to choose Betty or their goal. Simon, under all this meddling, still wants to be with Betty, but Apollo does not. We hear about Apollo wanting to enact his plan, but something is holding him back. Something delicate. Something that could perhaps be destroyed easily. This isn't to say that Simon and Apollo are different people. Apollo is just a different part of Simon. Do we know where Apollo comes from, though? Actually, I do have a theory as to where the voice comes from. It's implied Simon has been to Hawaii once before, but in what context? This album is oozing with Pearl Harbor stuff, so what if Simon was at the Pearl Harbor attack and got severe trauma from it? PTSD has been demonstrated to show parallel symptoms with schizophrenia, specifically psychosis. You could start seeing delusions, hallucinations, and talking incoherently. After World War II, Simon most likely became emotionally apathetic and distant. This is demonstrated all throughout Isle Unto Thyself. When he had to go back to Hawaii for his wedding, this likely sparked a relapse in symptoms. That's when he became a victim of Apollo's magic. He'd been able to fight back against it until their wedding, but finally caved in. This theory isn't watertight, but with all the evidence we have out there, I think this is the best explanation. This is also the next big piece of evidence as to why the album is set in the 1960s. Most realistically, Simon would have been 18 in 1941. It's not unreasonable for him to get married in the age range of 37 to 47, especially someone as emotionally withdrawn as him. Thus concludes Simon's current mental state. I'm really sorry this video took so long to get out. I promise I've just been busy with school stuff, so it's hard to release any long, dense analytical content. But next time in the Hawaii Part 2 saga, we get to the big one. This is arguably the most important song in the canon, it Murders. If you like Hawaii Part 2 and analyses, make sure to stick around. I've got more stuff coming in the future. I've been Lexi Hugs, and I'll see you later.